When Betty Vasquez's husband asked her a question no spouse expects, she laughed. Not because it was funny, but because she didn't know what else to do. Then she cried. And then, she actually said yes. This story isn't about sneaking around, it's not about lies or betrayal. This story is about a question, a fantasy that cracked open something way deeper than either of them were ready for. And yeah, it changed everything. Let me ask you something. What would you do if your partner looked you in the eye and said they wanted to watch you with someone else? Would you shut it down immediately? Would it make you feel betrayed, flattered, curious? Drop a comment right now because this isn't just their story. This is the kind of thing that makes all of us think about what we do. And hey, if you're into real-life stories that don't sugarcoat the mess, but actually go there, subscribe, stay until the end. Because the twist? It's not what you think. Let's rewind for a second. Betty Vasquez and Christophe Carey had what looked like a solid marriage from the outside. No big fights, no dramatic cheating scandals. Just two professionals building a life together. The kind of couple that had the nice apartment, the dinner parties, the inside jokes their friends admired. But behind closed doors, things were quiet. A little too quiet. You know the kind of quiet I'm talking about. The kind where the conversation slowly shifts from deep talks at midnight to who's grabbing groceries and whose turn it is to walk the dog. Where touch becomes routine, not romantic. And you start to wonder, does this silence mean we're okay, or does it mean we've stopped trying? That's where Betty found herself. She wasn't unhappy, but she wasn't lit up either. And Christophe? He was sweet, thoughtful, but kind of emotionally checked out. He didn't complain. He didn't push. Maybe that was part of the problem. They weren't falling apart, but they weren't exactly holding each other together anymore either. And what made it harder? They had a history. Real love. Years ago, they were the couple dancing barefoot in the kitchen, traveling spontaneously, whispering secrets under the cover. They had been in it. All the way in it. But somewhere along the way, life started happening faster than they could hold on to each other. And even though they both felt it, neither of them said it out loud. Until one night, he did. It happened on one of those nights that felt normal. A couple glasses of wine, soft music playing in the background. The kind of evening where you're close enough to remember the love, but distant enough to feel the space between you. And then just like that, Christophe said something that changed everything. Not in a dramatic, explosive way. There wasn't a fight. No one screamed or slammed a door. It was just one quiet sentence. He said, "I've had this thought for a while. I think I'd like to see you with a woman." At first, Betty laughed. Just a little. Not because it was funny, but because she had no idea what else to do. You know that nervous laugh? That "what the hell are you talking about" laugh? Yeah, that one. But Christophe didn't laugh back. He didn't grin. He didn't lean in like it was some flirty joke. He just looked at her, calm, serious, honest. And that's when the air shifted. She stared at him, trying to figure out if she was being pranked or tested, or what. She asked him why. Why would he want that? Was he bored? Was he unhappy? Was he trying to push her away? And his answer? It wasn't what she expected. He said, "It's not about not wanting you, it's the opposite. I trust you so much, and I want to know what it would be like to see you completely open, unfiltered, free." Betty didn't even know how to process that. Was it love? Was it lust? Was it a trap? Because let's be real, this wasn't just some playful fantasy. This was a request that cracked open something deep, something strange, something that made her question everything about their relationship and about herself. And maybe that's why it scared her so much. She stood up, no yelling, no drama. She just said, "I need to get some air." She grabbed her keys and walked out the door. And then came the spiral. She walked for what felt like hours. No destination, just moving. Street lights glowing, her footsteps echoing, and 1,000 questions buzzing through her head. What did this mean? Why now? Was she losing him? Or was this him trying not to lose her? Part of her felt sick. The other part felt something she didn't want to name. Something uncomfortable. Something curious. Because here's the thing. This wasn't about watching porn or adding a third person for kick. This was personal, emotional, vulnerable. And when she really thought about it, that was the most confusing part of all. Why didn't he sound excited, but exposed? Why did this feel less like a kink, and more like a confession? And why, after all the initial shock, did some small, quiet part of her not hate the idea? This was the night the seed was planted. She didn't know it yet. He probably didn't either, but something had shifted, not in a loud, obvious way, but in that slow, dangerous kind of way, where you know life won't feel the same once you start asking yourself the real questions. After that night, things didn't go back to normal. Christophe didn't bring it up again. He gave her space, but that silence, it was louder than ever. Betty couldn't stop thinking about it. Not the idea, exactly, but the way he said it. The softness in his voice. The way he looked at her, not with hunger but with hope. Like he was asking her to show him a part of herself he'd never seen before. And it messed with her head. Was he bored of me? Was I not enough anymore? Or was this about something deeper? She started spiraling. Every innocent comment Christophe made started to feel loaded. Every quiet night felt suspicious. Her self-esteem took the hit first. She looked in the mirror and didn't see a woman someone wanted to watch. She saw someone tired, predictable, settled. But at the same time, there was something else. Something she didn't want to admit. Something that felt like a door, one that had always been there, but she'd never dared to open. She'd pushed it down for years. Little thoughts, flickers of curiosity, questions she never asked out loud. That college moment with a friend she never told anyone about. That time at the beach, when she caught herself staring a little too long. Nothing ever acted on, always buried. Because that wasn't her, right? She was straight. She was married. She was safe. But now that door wasn't locked anymore. It was cracked. Just a little. Just enough. She found herself distracted at work, in the grocery store, even in traffic. She started replaying conversations in her head, started wondering, what if this wasn't just his fantasy? What if it's mine too, and I've just been too afraid to say it first? One afternoon, she sat in her car in the driveway for nearly an hour, just sitting, thinking. She opened her notes app and typed out, "What would it mean if I wanted it to?" She deleted it, then typed it again. That night she booked a therapy session. She told herself it was for the usual stuff. Stress, marriage, burnout. But when she finally sat across from someone who didn't know her history or her husband, the words tumbled out faster than she expected. He said he wanted to watch me, with a woman. The therapist didn't flinch, didn't raise an eyebrow, just asked, "And how did that make you feel?" And that was the thing. Betty didn't know. She was embarrassed, angry, intrigued. She felt seen and exposed, excited and ashamed. And underneath all of that, curious, terrifyingly, unapologetically curious. What if his fantasy wasn't about him at all? What if it was a mirror, one she'd been avoiding for years? What if the part of herself she'd buried the deepest was the one that needed to be uncovered the most? Betty started noticing things differently. Conversations, looks, her own thoughts. She wasn't just thinking about whether she could go through with it. She was starting to wonder what she might discover if she did. And that was even scarier than the idea itself. She didn't have an answer yet, but she knew one thing, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't pretend it wasn't. A few weeks later, Betty got invited to a gallery opening by her friend Rosemarie. She almost didn't go. Work had been stressful. She was still sorting through everything Christophe had said, but something in her, some quiet, restless part said, "Go." She walked in, wine in hand, looking at the paintings like they were puzzles she didn't have the energy to solve. And that's when she noticed her, Jeanette Kelly. She wasn't flash. She wasn't the kind of woman who walked into a room and demanded attention, but she didn't hide either. She stood by a piece in the back, bold, raw brushstrokes, nothing polished. There was something grounded about her, confident, but like she wasn't performing for anyone, least of all Betty. They ended up standing near the same sculpture, something abstract and a little weird. Jeanette turned and said, Looks like someone gave their emotions a nervous breakdown and then framed it. Betty laughed, really laughed for the first time in weeks. That was how it started. Not with flirting, not with sparks flying, just a real, honest conversation. The kind you don't expect to have with a stranger at an art show. They talked about everything. Weird art, bad wine, relationships, dogs, life. Betty couldn't remember the last time she felt that seen. Jeanette wasn't trying to impress her. She wasn't trying anything. She was just there, present, listening, honest. And the thing that caught Betty most off guard, there was no judgment in Jeanette's eyes, no assumptions, no expectations, just curiosity, warmth. And when their eyes locked for a second too long, Jeanette didn't pull away, but she didn't push forward either. Voiceover, gentle, observant. Jeanette didn't chase her, but she didn't flinch either. That night, back home, Betty told Christophe, not everything, not yet, just that she met someone interesting. And here's what surprised her. He didn't tense up, he didn't get defensive, he listened, really listened. He asked what they talked about. He smiled when she laughed, recounting Jeanette's sarcastic takes on modern art. He even asked, did she make you feel something? And Betty just nodded, not with guilt, not with shame, just honesty. There was something shifting between them, between Betty and Christophe. It wasn't about the fantasy anymore. It was about trust. This strange new kind of trust that came from not hiding. Over the next few days, Betty couldn't stop thinking about Jeanette, not in a lustful, impulsive way, but in a curious way. She didn't know what she wanted. She didn't even know what she was walking toward. But for the first time in a long time, she felt alive. And Christophe, he wasn't pulling her back. He was watching her grow and holding space for it. Whatever came next, it wasn't about someone cheating. It was about two people stepping into the unknown, together. Sometimes the most powerful connections don't explode into your life. They arrive quietly. They sit beside your fear, and they wait for you to be ready. And Jeanette, she wasn't a fantasy. She was real. And suddenly, so was this. A few days after the gallery night, Betty sent a message she reread at least 15 times before hitting send. It wasn't flirty. It wasn't dramatic. It simply said, would you want to grab coffee sometime? And Jeanette replied, sure, I'd like that. They met at a quiet cafe with creaky wooden chairs and 2 strong espresso. And for a moment, they just sat there, surrounded by the low hum of conversation and clinking cups. Betty didn't know where to start. The moment felt too big for small talk, but too fragile for confession. She finally said, this might be the weirdest conversation I've ever had. Jeanette just smiled, warm and steady. Good. Weird's where the honest stuff lives. They didn't dance around it. Betty told her the truth about Christophe, about the conversation, about how she hadn't been able to stop thinking, about the fear, the curiosity, the guilt, the spark. And Jeanette listened, the same way she had at the gallery, fully, without flinch. Then she said something Betty didn't expect. I'm not here to fix your marriage, but I'm not here to break it either. I'm here because I feel something. And if you do too, then maybe we owe it to ourselves to see what it is. It wasn't seductive. It wasn't manipulative. It was human. And for Betty, that's what made it so terrifying. Because this wasn't about fantasy anymore. It was real. It had a face, a voice, a heartbeat. That night she sat across from Christophe at their dining table, and they talked, really talked, not just about what they were considering, but about what it would mean, what they were afraid of, what they were protecting, and what they were risking. They made rules, not as a checklist, but as lifelines, no secrets, total honesty. Either one could stop it at any point. And above all, this wasn't about replacing anything between them. It was about exploring something they couldn't reach without each other's trust. Betty cried during that conversation, not because she was sad, but because she was terrified. She looked at him and said, I'm scared this will change how you see me. Christophe took her hand. His eyes didn't waver, and he said, I hope it does. That was the moment. The decision wasn't about whether or not to do. The real decision was, are we brave enough to let each other evolve, even if it means stepping into something we don't fully understand? They weren't chasing excitement. They were chasing honesty. And for the first time in years, that felt more intimate than anything they'd shared in bed. This wasn't a decision to cheat. It was a decision to trust, to experiment, yes, but with their hearts wide open, not closed off behind lies. Whatever happened next, it would be on their terms, together. They didn't rush it. There was no countdown, no dramatic build-up, no last-minute second-guessing, just a quiet evening, a shared decision, and three people walking into something uncertain, with their hearts beating a little louder than usual. They met at Jeanette's place. Soft lighting, a single candle flickering on the table. Nothing was forced. No one played a role. There was no script. It wasn't wild. It wasn't taboo. It was careful, slow, deliberate. Betty wasn't there to perform. She wasn't being watched. She was being witnessed. Christophe sat nearby, still respectful. Not like someone watching something for pleasure, but like someone watching someone they love become. There was no jealousy in his face, no tension in his shoulders, just awe, and maybe a little fear, because what he was seeing wasn't the fantasy he'd imagined. It was something deeper, something real. For Betty, it didn't feel like cheating. It didn't even feel like stepping outside of her marriage. It felt like stepping into herself, for the first time in a very long time. There were moments she thought she might break from the emotion alone. Not because of Jeanette, but because of what Jeanette reflected back at her. Acceptance, curiosity, calm. Jeanette didn't try to lead. She didn't try to control. She just met Betty where she was. Their eyes locked. No words, no explanations. And in that silence, Betty felt something crack open. Not pain, not guilt, but freedom. Christophe watched Betty exhale. Really exhale. For what felt like the first time in years. Not a sigh, not stress leaving the body, but the kind of breath you take when you stop pretending. And in that moment, he realized this wasn't about desire. It wasn't even about attraction. It was about surrender, and the courage it takes to be fully seen. It stopped being about fantasy. It became revelation. This wasn't a night about crossing a line. It was about erasing one they never knew was there in the first place. There were no fireworks, just three people sharing a space that felt more sacred than sexual. By the time Betty looked back at Christophe, her eyes were full, not with regret, not with shame, with something closer to gratitude. And his eyes didn't say, "You're mine." They said, "I see you." They didn't say much after, just held hands, sat in the quiet, and let the weight of what just happened settle around them like a new kind of peace. It didn't fix everything, but it broke something open, and sometimes that's where healing begins. The next morning wasn't movie perfect. There were no slow kisses or whispered thank yous, just stillness. Betty woke up first. She sat on the edge of the bed, holding a cup of coffee she'd reheated twice. The apartment was quiet. Christophe was still in the bedroom, probably pretending to be asleep, because neither of them knew exactly what to say yet. She wasn't overwhelmed. She wasn't even conflicted. She was just changed. Something inside her had shifted. She couldn't name it yet, but she could feel it. In her shoulders, in her breath, in the way her feet touched the floor when Later, Christophe came out, and for a few minutes, they just sat across from each other in the living room, nursing mugs that had gone cold. There was no "so, how are you feeling?" No overanalyzing, no guilt, just stillness. And then slowly, Betty reached across the couch and took his hand. Their fingers laced together like muscle memory, like something old finding its way back. She looked at him, eyes tired but clear, and said, "I thought I did this for you, but I think I did it for me too." And Christophe, he didn't say much. He just nodded, pulled her closer and whispered, "Good." That day, Betty opened her journal for the first time in months. She wrote things she didn't know she'd been holding in. Not just about Jeanette or the night before, but about herself, how she'd been shrinking, how she stopped asking what she wanted years ago, how this moment wasn't about sex at all, but about choosing herself fully for the first time in a long time. She flipped back through old entries, pages filled with lists and stress and schedule. Then she started a new page and simply wrote, "I felt alive last night. And not just because of what happened, because of how seen she felt, by Jeanette, by Christophe, by herself." Later that afternoon, she got a message from Jeanette. Simple, thoughtful, no pressure. "Hope today feels grounded. You are beautiful. No follow-ups, no expectations, just kindness." Betty smiled, closed her phone, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel guilty for feeling good. She wasn't thinking about what this meant for the marriage or the rules. She was thinking about the fact that she could breathe deeper now, that her laugh felt real again, that when she walked through the grocery store she didn't feel invisible. There was no affair, no betrayal, just a step into the unknown, and somehow they found each other in. What they did wasn't about thrill, it was about truth. And sometimes, the most intimate thing you can do with someone you love is stop pretending you're not still becoming. Clearer than she'd felt in years. And not because she'd crossed some forbidden line, but because she stopped hiding from herself. She stopped shrinking to make her marriage more comfortable. And Christophe, he didn't just allow that growth, he welcomed. This whole experience wasn't about some dramatic betrayal. There was no villain here, no other woman trying to steal anything. There was just truth, raw, unexpected, and honestly overdue. For so long Betty thought staying loyal meant staying the same, not changing, not questioning, not touching the edge of anything that felt dangerous. But what she realized was that real loyalty means evolving together, even when the evolution is scary. Because love isn't static. It's not a box you stay in. It's a living thing. And if it doesn't breathe, it dies. Christophe knew that, maybe before she did. And when he said that one wild thing, the thing that cracked everything open, it wasn't about thrill. It was about trust. It wasn't about watching her. It was about seeing her, and giving her the space to see herself without guilt or filters or fear. After that night, everything didn't magically get easier, but something was different. They looked at each other like teammates again. Betty laughed more, walked different. She carried herself with this quiet power, like someone who'd taken their identity off the shelf and dusted it off for the first time in years. Christophe, he admired her more, because he saw her full, and not just the version of her that used to fit his idea of a wife, but the version that was still unfolding. And Jeanette, she didn't linger, she didn't interfere, she just sent a kind message. No drama, no expectations, just because this wasn't a story about a third person ruining a marriage. It was a story about two people stepping into a truth so many of us are too scared to say out loud. Sometimes the safest place is the one where you're allowed to change. So now let me ask you, what would you do if your partner asked you this? Would you feel betrayed? Curious? Would you even consider it? Would it break something, or would it reveal something that's been waiting under the surface for a long time? Tell us in the comments. No filters, no shame. We're here for the real conversations. And if this story pulled something out of you, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notifications. We've got more stories that dig into the messy, honest, jaw-dropping sides of love, loyalty, and intimacy. Because sometimes, the most shocking thing isn't what happens. It's who you become after it.